Okay, thank you. So, dear colleagues, welcome to this seminar. It's the 8th edition, and it's technically the 3rd season of our seminar series. We started early in spring 2021 and continues in fall, and now it's another year. So we are very happy and glad that you joined our seminar series on the social role of colleges. I first wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we, as scholars and students of the University of Toronto, are grateful and very happy to have the opportunity to work on this very land. This seminar series is organized by Professor Lisa Wheelahan and Professor Gavin Moody and myself, Jacob Cost, with the support of the Center for the Study of Canadian and International Higher Education at OISE at the University of Toronto. So the series explores the important roles that community colleges and similar type of institutions play in supporting social, educational, and cultural development in their local communities and regions. And we argue, and I think that's really the common thread through these different speeches. We argue that the roles that universities, that the colleges play are not as well understood and not as well theorized as the roles of universities and schools. And that's very important because the community colleges and similar institutions play a very important role in many often invisible ways in their communities. Until now, the speaker series featured great presentations on developments in the college sector in Canada and Australia, in France, in Switzerland, in Finland, the United States, Germany, and the UK. And you can access all these previous presentations, the slides, the recordings of the presentations on our website, and I'll post a link to the website right now on the chat. So we are very happy to continue this series with a talk from our today's speaker, Cristian Lincovil Belmar, with the title Defying the Primacy of the Market, Challenges of Chile's Public Higher Education, Vocational Education. Cristian Lincovil Belmar is the Executive Officer for Secondary Vocational Education at the Chilean Ministry of Education. He has an industrial engineer. He is an industrial engineer from the Catholic University of Chile and the Master of Education in Social Justice Education at OISE. So he's very close to our hearts. And he had worked in the field of vocational education and training for more than a decade, and as a practitioner, research, and policymaker, leading the team behind the first TVET strategy in the country of Chile in 2018. And currently he's in charge of the definition and deployment of policy aimed at vocational high schools in Chile. And this speak was as well prepared by Miski Peralta Rojas. She is the Chief of Higher Vocational Education Division at the Chilean Ministry of Education. She is a sociologist and has a master in management and public policy from the University of Chile and a PhD in sociology at the Catholic University of Chile. She has been a lecturer there in research methods, and also her areas of expertise include sociology of education, research method, and policy evaluation. Unfortunately, Miski cannot be here tonight, but I think Cristian will give us a wonderful presentation about this topic. And so we are very happy, Cristian, you found time to introduce us to some recent discussion in the Chilean VET system. And just a quick reminder before we start, if you have any questions during the talk, please post them in the chat, and Cristian is very happy to answer them after his talk. So without further ado, Cristian, we're looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I was a student at OISE and I know the work of Lisa and Gavin and all the people at OIC, and it's just wonderful to be here talking about what we are doing today at the Chilean Ministry of Education. I will put my slides first. So, okay. So this is not the first. So what we are going to talk about today is about how we are trying to defy or to create a more at least a mixed provision system in Chile for higher vocational education. I will go deeper into this, but vocational higher education in Chile, or higher vocational education, is a field that has been composed of only private institutions for at least 30 years. And recently, in 2016, we created regional higher vocational education institutions that had a different goal from traditional private ones. So this new public state-led institutions functions within a policy framework, a regulation framework that it's very market-oriented. So what I'm going to talk about today is first how we understand this is very brief, but the theoretical discussion at the base of what we're trying to do, and then how we approach the Chile's current situation and how what we propose for vocational education, and I will talk at the end of specifically of these public higher vocational education institutions. Miski is the person who is in charge of these higher education institutions, but still I can answer some more general questions. We work together, but surely there will be more specific questions that are outside my range. But part of what we wanted to show you is how this is within a framework of a more just an understanding of vocational education that aims for social justice. So the first thing I want to tell you is the very brief theoretical framework that we approach. We like to say that we are going to from economic growth to sustainable human development, and in a more focused sense from employability as the main goal of vocational education to substantive freedom. So it's a more human-centered vocational education. So today, internationally, not just in Chile or Latin America, but I think in the last century, vocational education has, without saying it explicitly, human capital theory has functioned as the theoretical basis for vocational education, and it's mostly through the notion that more education means more productivity, and that means more income, and at a national level that means economic growth. But and this is a theory that Lisa and Gavin say it many times, but it has come from a descriptive theory to a normative one to something that become almost mandatory. But this idea of education being the most important factor for economic growth implies other issues related to well-being in human capital theory, at least in its most orthodox theorizations. But if we take human capital theory as a theoretical basis, that is that we take it to the more practical extremes, we end up with understanding development almost as a synonym for economic growth. So other elements of development are not considered explicitly. The purpose of education is said to be economic growth, but at the same time, when a country fails to develop in economic terms, education is blamed for it. So to fix the economy, we must fix education, and other factors are not considered, at least not in public discourses. Education as a form of human capital accumulation is also an individual responsibility. So privatization is related to human capital theory as a basis for education, and the more structural conditions for inequality and injustice, they are obscured by the notion of meritocracy and the accumulation of human capital as the driver for success. So what has appeared, it's the notion of the capabilities approach, and it starts in the work of Amartya Sen, but also the work of Martha Nussbaum, as a way of trying to create a more broad approach to development. So Amartya Sen proposes that the poverty is not the lack of money or the lack of economic resources, but the lack of freedom. And in that sense, if you are equally poor in economic terms, but you to another person, but you chose to live in those conditions, you had other options, then you are more free than a person who was who had no other opportunity. So these options, the capabilities that are available for people, depends not only on the individual characteristics like human capital, but also on social structures and on arrangements. So it's a broader problem, and if we approach vocational education from a perspective that takes into account this notion of capabilities as broader resources than human capital, then we get what McGrath and many other scholars, Lisa Gavin, Stephanie Elias, and many people have been working on, and this is a capabilities approach for vocational education that challenges this notion of education as human capital, and especially vocational education as human capital accumulation. And it centers on students' voices and on their life experiences, aspirations, and it has 8 key elements that we should consider in order to pursue a more human-centered vocational education. And they have to do with multidimensional poverty, gender issues, with how the political economy of skills work in a determined society, with the conceptualization of work outside employment, with the notion on human flourishing, with aspiration as the central driver of people's lives, and understanding that pathways are not just one point in time, but multiple decision points through life. So this debate between a more traditional ways of framing vocational education and the capabilities approach and other theoretical approaches to vocational education has been part of some discussions in Chile, but not necessarily they have been at the forefront of the discussion. But if you follow the development of public policies in the last 20 years, it has been like kind of a discursive amalgamation between a more traditional human capital approach and more social justice open approaches like the right to education and the capabilities approach. But to understand what happens in Chile it is necessary to understand what is the situation of Chile, both in terms of the country in social, economic, and political terms, but also how the vocational education system is structured. So Chile is regarded as a successful neoliberal economy, or it was until I think at least 4 years ago. And this is because Chile has been one of the few countries that has transited from a middle to high income country in recent years in terms of per capita GDP. But the political economy of Chile is based on a hierarchical market economy where public enterprises were privatized, with capital is highly concentrated in family business, where the services are the most dynamic economic sector, and where workers and unions are not political or social actors in a big way. They have been relegated to a more partisan way of doing politics. And also some authors have identified Chile as an example of a neo-market system of skills formation, where basically economic growth is based on especially on the cost of labor force, and where coordination of supply and demand of skills is left almost entirely to the market. And the state intervenes only when some market failure is identified. And this in terms of the educational system, and I'm starting to go into vocational education slowly, but Chile has one of the most marketized and segregated education systems in the world. We have public schools, subsidized private schools, and fully private schools. The funding is based on a voucher and a demand-driven voucher, where schools are paid in order depending on the enrollment and attendance of students. And until 2015, I think, subsidized private schools could charge an additional fee on students, and that created at that point an almost complete segregation depending on your payment, how much you could pay for education. And in terms of the vocational and academic tracks, tracking starts in upper secondary education, which is part of the mandatory education. They are the 2 years or the last 2 years of high school. And there's a stratification where students in vocational education tend to be from more disadvantaged backgrounds. Although there are many academic schools in poor neighborhoods, but the thing is there are no vocational schools in the more rich neighborhoods, and both academic and vocational tracks give access to the high school diploma, and that is the only condition to go to higher education. But universities, and especially the most prestigious and recognized universities, use standardized tests to admit students, and that test has been proven to. We have a new test now. Maybe it enhances the situation, but the test we had until last year created a difference in opportunities to enter university for students from the vocational track and students in the academic track. And when we go to the higher education system, there's what I called a truncated parallel typology, where we have a specific subsector, specific institutions for vocational education, and then universities for academic higher education. But there is a clear hierarchy, and we don't have the vocational education system can't award academic degrees. So students in the vocational track in higher education can go for a master's degree, for example, because that is a requisite for going to postgraduate studies or graduate studies. And on the other hand, universities can award also technical degrees. So you have a hierarchy of credentials, but at the same time, you have a hierarchy of institutions that it's related to the type of credentials that they could award. So with that in mind, what happened with the higher vocational education system in Chile, this typology, this truncated parallel typology, emerged in the 1980s through marketization policies and privatization policies led by the dictatorship. So today we have that 95% of higher vocational education students are enrolled in private institutions. That there are 7 institutions that are all private that concentrate 72% of students in higher vocational institutions, and that from the late 1980s to 2016, there were no public higher vocational education institutions. The whole system was private, although there were some public universities that offered vocational programs, but they were less than 5% of enrollment. And also, Chile has had an explosive growth of not only vocational higher education, but higher education in general. We have one of the highest enrollment rate in Latin America and even in the world. And in this scenario, higher vocational education represents more than 50% of students who enter higher education each year. So it's a big part of the system. It's not just a marginal part of the system. And it is very interesting that until the mid-outs, the enrollment in vocational education was smaller, and then because there were no public funding available for students, and that is part of the 1980s reforms, which framed vocational education as an investment on human capital that should be funded and financed by the people who benefit from that, the students. But when funding was made available through student loans in 2006 and some scholarships, the vocational sector started to grow till becoming at least as big as the university sector. And today, vocational institutions that are non-profit, we have, this is the only space in the Chilean educational system that allows profit for institutions. But those institutions who have at least 4 years of quality accreditation and are non-profit could opt to be part of free tuition for students. And it is important to consider that there are no base funding mechanisms for vocational institutions. It's all demand driven. So what are we trying to do in this context? And first, and this is not part of the government that we are today leading, but it's part of it was created in 2016. But since all state institutions or state vocational higher education institutions were disbanded or made academic ones or privatized during the 1980s, after 30 years, in 2016, 15 regional technical training centers, which are 2-year program institutions, were created by law. So in the design process of these institutions, of this policy, the goal was very different than going to compete in the market with existing institutions. That there are very good institutions, private institutions, and they are very solid, and the notion of competition was not what these state institutions were aiming for. They were small scale institutions. They were away from the region, the capital city of the region. So the main goal was leading or being really connected with the local development, with not only in economic terms, but also in social terms. And they were based on a democratic governance. They have a board that is composed of state representatives, worker representatives, and employer representatives. The programs must be related to local needs and the region's development strategy, and they should connect with other educational institutions, vocational high schools, professional institutes that are 4-year colleges, and universities. But this policy was enacted in 2016, and the implementation of the first, I think the first years of these new institutions were led by a political sector who opposed the policy when it was discussed at the parliament. So and to be clear, these difficulties that I mentioned later are not necessarily part because of this political sector leading the implementation, but there were aspects of the legislation that should have been work, which we should have worked in these issues, and they were kind of not considered during the first years. So there's a lack of financial and technical support for these institutions. There is a focus on human capital development, regardless of the focus of the policy, at least in the narrative of a more human-centered educational pathway and labor pathway focused policy. And there are weak relations with local environment. And this is, I will go to that, but this is largely due to funding mechanisms and regulation that even if the institutional goal is to create a a vocational education ecosystem within the territory. The market structure of the regulation makes it very difficult to go from the declaration to action. So what has happened in between is that even with different governments and with different political sensibilities of this government, there is an agreement of the role that vocational education should play in people's lives, and that it is related to the life pathways of people and also to economic, social development, sustainability, and also to decent work. So with this in mind, we proposed, our government proposed, based on the capabilities approach, that vocational education should strive for sustainable human development, and this is the bettering of each person's substantive well-being, and we consider that if vocational education will support these people's well-being, it will be aligned with people's aspiration and desires. It will be not an educational effort, but an intersectoral effort. Education, work, social justice, policies, social policies should be part of the efforts, and it will be focused on human flourishing and not just preparation for a job. So we identify that there are a distinction between, for example, training and formal education, and that is part of what we are trying to build. And so our agenda had to do with vocational education for human flourishing, with participatory democracy and vocational education. That means including different social stakeholders, and with a focus on community, on the local aspects of vocational education, and so it related directly with the initial goal of this state higher vocational education institutions that are called technical training centers. So what we are doing today, and the challenge that we have is we have an action plan to strengthen these state vocational institutions, and it is related to funding, to enhance funding mechanisms, both in the availability of resources, but also how you give those resources to the institutions. Support for quality assurance processes. Actually the first vocational education institutions should go through their first quality assurance process this year, but we passed a law where we gave them more time, and we are supporting them in preparing this process. Strengthening the democratic governance of these institutions, having a different way of understanding how this board that is comprised by the state, employers and workers should go through social dialogue, and also better infrastructure for these institutions. We are also developing some local development initiatives that are more related to economic and social development at those regions. But we are giving these vocational institutions a role to play in those initiatives. And even if we are doing this, this is a kind of a very, and I think it is a sign of these different notions of the role of vocational education that are undisclosed in many of policy and public debates. But there are some structural challenges that we need to address, and we don't know if we can solve them in the short term. So it is a challenge that maybe will be part of another government agenda also. But marketization has led to institutional relationships in higher education that are based on competition for students, for enrollment. So, and this competition for public funding is based on having an equal treatment between public and private institutions. Even if public institutions have some demands by law, they are demanded by law to fulfill some functions and some roles within the community that private institutions are not mandated. They could do it, but it depends on each institution's own goals. So there is a tension between this mission of state institutions that aims for more a more open vocational education that kind of anchors the community in terms of the development, the human development, the social development, and the economic development, and the regulation of higher education that comes from mostly from the reforms of the 1980s. So we have this clash between the new regulation from 2018 and this old regulation that puts the base structure. So the following years will be crucial to the success of state higher vocational education. They will face many challenges, and we as policymakers should also develop different strategies to support them in this process, and that will be the key to I think this is kind of a turning point. We must help those state higher vocational education institutions to become part of the system with recognized quality and a recognized relationship with the environment, and so in some sense we should prove that public vocational education is not only a good idea, but it's also needed for the development of the country. And that's all for now, I think. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristian. That was a lovely speech, and I heard the speech of you in the fall, but I learned again a lot on the Chilean system. So we have, I think, 2 comments by Anne Charles, and yeah, just to keep in mind, we have scholars here, students as well, so everybody is very welcome to ask questions, and with the whole variety, and yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And Charles?
So,
sorry.
Do I answer the questions in the chat first, and then we took others?
Yeah, I think I would ask Anne Charles to repeat her question, and then we go, and if you have a question, just raise your hand and then you'll pop up and talk and ask you to pose it.
I'll read my question exactly as it's written in the chat, and I'd be very, very interested to hear your thoughts on it. So my question is about Chilean students, and you mentioned in your presentation that the system works very much as a voucher system with a top up, and you mentioned about the inequities. But in particular, I was interested whether or not there were Chilean students that have been attracted by our liberalization that has occurred, particularly in the colleges. We've seen tremendous growth of students, and particularly with this Study Work Stay initiative. And I wondered whether or not our policy was contributing to brain drain, or whether it was actually providing some opportunities for Chilean students to get vocational training up to the baccalaureate level, which doesn't currently exist domestically.
Yeah, in that sense, I think most students from, as I mentioned, that most students in higher vocational education come from more disadvantaged background. So they usually don't aim to to go study abroad. So it is more common for students in actually, I think it's graduate students who go to other countries like Canada or the US or England, or Spain. Spain is a very common destination to pursue their careers, but it's very uncommon for students in that undergraduate, vocational and academic, to go outside the country. So and I think the debate on in the graduate level, the debate on brain drain or professionalization is still open. I think I mean the Chilean government has funded many people to go study abroad, myself included, and they ask you to come back to Chile, at least for a period. But it's not really linked to working opportunities necessarily. I mean, it depends on what you studied and how can you create relations with what you did before.
Thank you.
Okay, and we go further with Lisa with a question.
Thank you, Cristian, for an absolutely wonderful presentation, as always. I think what you showed really clearly is the difficulties of having an aspirational policy, and how it's you know, governments can have an aspirational policy. It's not as if they've got a blank sheet of paper and they can just do it, you know, like they've got to actually confront the realities of the ways in which that's interconnected in the economic, political, social and cultural ecosystems, but also the reality of relations of power. And I think it's really important that we learn from that and understand and learn from that in terms of developing strategies for change. One of the things I'm really that really struck me was that you talked about the focus on moving away from training to vocational education, to having a focus on human flourishing. Has this had any impact on curriculum design? And I mean, because the problem that we've got is that competency-based training is so entrenched, so taken for granted, and so pervasive as a curriculum model in vocational education. How do you go about challenging any of that? And have you had any success in doing so?
Yeah, it's part of what we are trying to do. It is important to notice that Chile has a different way of developing the curriculum for higher education and schools. The curriculum for schools is responsibility of the Ministry of Education and should be approved by the National Council for Education, while the curriculum for higher education institutions is they have total autonomy. They can choose whatever, and we have a qualification framework for vocational education, but it functions as a point of reference, and it's not mandatory. So what we are doing is we haven't talked about the like the foundations of the curriculum of vocational education in high schools for the last 25 years. We have some actualization, but it has been mostly to review the competencies that are demanded at the industry, and so it's in actualization, not a more profound, more deeper debate on curriculum. And what we are starting now, not only in vocational education, but in the school system, is we are starting a discussion with communities, with school communities, with early childhood education communities, about the curriculum and what is the curriculum that the country needs. And what we are trying to do is not asking just employers, but asking students about their aspirations. We are asking teachers, and we'll go to, we hope, each school in the country, each vocational school in the country, and have conversations with them. And using the qualification frameworks, some standardized tests that we also have in education, and also the work with employers and with workers to build a curriculum, but with an open discussions about what are the goals of the vocational education curriculum. It is hard. I think competency-based training, it's has been adopted for almost as common sense for different stakeholders. I think for most people within the vocational education sector, and what we are trying to do is not imposing a particular approach to curriculum, but having this discussion, and if we as a country decide that maybe some variation of competency-based training, it's what we need, well, that should be what happens. But if as we it is our intuition that if the curriculum needs to go through a different approximation to knowledge, we should build that curriculum.
That's a wonderful process. I haven't heard of a process like that anywhere. Sounds fantastic. We
hope it ends up okay, but yeah, I think students especially, but also teachers and other members of the community are eager to be part of this conversation. I think they need to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
And when I understand you correctly, this was also an answer to Anne Charles' question about whether vocational education institution can decide at total liberty whether they include sustainable development aspects in their curriculum or not, right?
Yeah, but I think many institutions, I mean, they are private, but they are mostly not necessarily industry related. They are full institutional institutions, especially the biggest ones, and so they are including some sustainability elements of the curriculum, and so it's an open conversation, and it is it can be a very fruitful conversation between I don't like this term, but the education providers and the state, and also including workers, employers, students. I think our what we are trying to do is get more people into the conversation, and so we can create a better policy for vocational education, and that doesn't mean stop listening to the industry. They are a very important part of the conversation, but they are one among many actors.
Okay, Kevin Moody, next question, I think.
Well, thank you very much, Cristian, for a wonderful presentation. And like Lisa, I appreciated the way you framed the contest between human capital theory and capabilities approach. Do I understand correctly that there are two types of institutions associated providing vocational education in Chile: vocational schools and professional institutes. And do I infer correctly that most of the effort and capacity is with vocational schools?
Yeah, actually we have three institutions that are part of the formal education system that award vocational credentials. We have vocational high schools. We have what we call technical training centers that are higher education 2 years programs, and we have the professional institutes that are higher education 4 year programs. And they are not linked necessarily. That is one of the problems of the system. We are actually this new discussion and curriculum. One of the things that we are trying to do is have a more fluid transit from high school to higher education, not only between vocational high school and vocational higher education, but also with some areas in universities that could be related to the specialization in high school. Part of what part of the discussion of what the curriculum needs to be is related to well, what's the difference between what we call an specialization and an actual occupation that it's I think more job related, while a specialization in the terms that we have defined it, it's more knowledge related, but that's an open discussion. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's because I'm laying the foundation for another inquiry. The second step of this inquiry I wish to pursue is this. Everybody says that everybody in the world should have the German dual system of apprenticeships. Yeah. But perhaps also everybody should have the German system of Fachhochschulen, universities of applied sciences, as they're translated in English, or as we would have called them a few years ago, polytechnics. Is there any institution which might be a candidate to develop into a Fachhochschule in 20 years' time?
What a hard question. Yeah, I think there are. I think there are some institutions that have tried and they have failed, not necessarily because of the institution, but the regulation of the system. There are some institutions that are academic but still have a very technical origin. We had during the 60s and well, before that, but until the 70s, we had until the 80s, we had the technical university, the state technical university, and that was it was not the polytechnic model, but it was closer to that, and but now that is a fully academic institution with some vocational history. But there's still one institution that is private that is it still declares it is a technical university, and although they are an academic institution, they still have kind of these vocational sensibilities. So maybe institutions like that, maybe some of the biggest vocational education institutions today, like INACAP or DUOC, maybe they will develop some sort of graduate school or or maybe it depends. I think one of the discussions that we must open, maybe not today, but in 5 or 10 years, is a discussion about the credentials, the credential structure in Chile. And when we have that discussion, I think it will be easier to say how the current institutions could change to be, I don't know, similar to the polytechnics. Understanding that I mean that's also a model that answers to a specific characteristic of the political economy of Germany and the German countries, like the more the Dutch countries.
Yes, indeed. And so the question I was building up to, this one now, is what capacity do the technical training centres, the professional institutes and the vocational high schools, what capacity do they have to shape their own development? What capacity do they have to respond to their local communities? What capacity do they have to develop a role other than workforce training?
Yeah. Oh, I think it has many different areas. I think vocational high schools, they don't have the capacity today to be part of this of this more open environment, at least not leading this environment, because they are too much school centered, and also they are part of the mandatory education. I think they need a major change if they are going to do that. And I think in the case of vocational higher education institutions, I think it depends on the institution, but I think there is a kind of a trade-off that it's the biggest institutions, they are really big. They have 100,000 students each, but they are spread across the country. So they are kind of a model that is replicated in different regions. So they answer, of course, they answer to the local needs, but they answer mostly to a central structure, but they are the ones who have the capacity to develop these more complex structures. And the smaller ones, they are very close to the territory. They are many times they are based just on one region, or they are directly related to one economic sector, but they are smaller, so they don't have the capacity to create these structures to work leading a more coordinated effort. So I think it is possible, but that requires an agreement between every stakeholders involved. I mean, it needs need that a robust state support program, but they also need to work closely with the industry and with another educational institutions and with workers. And I think we are building this dialogue. We have been building it for at least almost 10 years now, and I think maybe with time we will come to a point where they can be these institutions.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a shorter follow-up question by
Anna
about fertility rate and their influence.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Because the low fertility rate is represents a challenge in terms of for example, the number of students who are kind of available to go through higher education or even high schools. But I think what happens in Chile is that we have a low fertility rate, but we are receiving more immigrants in the later years. So we have I don't know if the challenge will be a lack of students, but will be maybe answering to students who are coming to the country and are new to the country and have different needs. We have people, for example, from Haiti coming to Chile, who not necessarily speak Spanish when they come, but also recognizing, and this is a huge challenge, recognizing the education that those people have in their countries, and that I mean, especially in the vocational sector, we have people coming from countries like Colombia, which has a very robust vocational education system, who come to Chile, and we don't have the mechanisms to recognize their vocational credentials here. So totally, I mean, I don't think that it's only the low fertility rate, but the low fertility rate combined with other demographic changes in the country will be a challenge that also makes more pressing the issue of having vocational education institutions that are connected with the environment, because the needs and the characteristic of that environment is changing.
Thank you.
Hey, Laura Schoen.
Thank you, and I've really enjoyed your talk. I guess where we are in Ontario, from my perspective at least, is we started out with a very strong public College of Applied Arts and Technology system, a weaker private system, very diverse, but through market policies pushing competition for sure and accountability, and an increased focus by governments on economic output and serving an economic purpose. Some of the contributing factors, I think, to where we are in Ontario, which seems to be going in the opposite direction of where you're trying to go in Chile, are making more credentials available to different types of institutions, of course, cutting funding, and opening up competition big time between publics as well as some of the private. So I'm interested in your thoughts on competition, which is must be so deeply entrenched in the Chilean system for so many years. This neophyte group of state institutions that are trying to grow and change the narrative and the way of being, but still have been part of this very competitive environment. And though they're very connected to local areas, what about competition between local areas for new industries and employers, and how does that affect the behavior and the steering of these institutions by these, the local community? And then what is the role of reputation, which of course fits into this whole competitive piece?
Yeah, I think it is very strange because we have regulation that encourages competition, and I think that has been a major obstacle to have a more wider and organized and coordinated effort in strengthening vocational education, both at high school level and at higher education level. But still, what needs it? I think it's kind of ironic, but the state vocational institutions started. I think some factions of the private institutions at first saw them as competition, and then when they noticed that they are in different places, they are smaller, started to work together, and now we have agreements between state institutions and private institutions where they can continue their studies. The students can continue in private institutions, and that's okay. But yeah, competition among I mean, there are very few ways in which vocational institutions can apply to public funding through a shared project. So so you have an atomization, and maybe there are two institutions that are developing very similar or going into very similar difficulties, but each one is created a totally unrelated solution because they had to apply for funding with different projects. And maybe if they work together, that will be better for not just for them, but for the whole system. And the same thing happens with the relationship with the industry, because as there are different industries, of course, each institution wants to have ideally an exclusive relationship with some employers. And usually it has to do with the reputation, as you say, of both the employer and the institution. And yeah, I mean, reputation is key in terms of almost everything, in terms of the success of students after their programs, because I think credentialism is a reality in terms of how employers make decisions about hiring new people. And so if you actually, I think if you are from one of the most prestigious vocational institutions, it is better for the employer than some of the less prestigious universities. So although we have this hierarchy that it's embedded in regulation, the reputation of institutions can sometimes challenge that process. I mean, all of these models are just an approximation to reality, which is always much more complex.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder to all students, they are very welcome to ask questions. Also the students from Dr. Moo's seminar, they're very welcome to ask your question. Gavin Moody has the next.
Are some of the private vocational and private higher education institutions Catholic?
Yeah.
Do the Catholic institutions promote strongly a Catholic ethos? Might the capabilities approach be consistent with the Catholic aspiration to develop each person their own strengths?
I think, yeah, yes to everything. And actually, I think I saw one of my colleagues from one of the Catholic vocational institutions here, that they actually started to talk about capabilities. I think at least at the same time that the policy discussion has started to include this, and so yeah, I think there is I mean, the work of Martha Nussbaum is heavily inspired by Catholic ethos. So yeah, I mean, if I think of the higher vocational institutions who have been kind of going closer to a capabilities approach, I think even if they are not strictly Catholic, they have a Catholic inspiration. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is space for working through a capabilities approach from different perspective, and I think the Catholic world is one of the spaces where this approach makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you very much. So then I step in with some questions. I was very interested in, I mean, some of this, what you described, is really pretty recent development, to my understanding. And what do you know about the public perception of these, for instance, web centers, and what the communities think about their value, their contribution to, their linkage to the labor market, their contribution, for instance, are they regarded as an effective measure to tackle labor shortage? Are they regarded as that they contribute to their communities in a social or some other than only credentials way? Is there a discussion about that?
I think it depends on, I mean, in general terms, I think we don't have a study yet, like evidence, like hard evidence, because it is a very recent policy. But I think the perception is it's that even considering the initial opposition from some sectors, it's a policy that has stayed. It has a high degree of policy retention. I think it's valued, especially locally, because it eases access to higher education for a lot of people. I mean, not a lot in terms of the size of the biggest institutions, but to people who didn't have access or easy access to higher education. But there are, of course, there are criticisms. I mean, I think one of the promises was that the program offering will be deeply related to the needs of the territory in terms of economics and work opportunities. But since there's a very different reality in each institution, and also they should fund themselves through enrollment. Usually the programs that appear are not the most needed, but the most wanted by students. So you can have a higher enrollment, and it's part of these tensions. And that's something that maybe communities, well, they can see that not necessarily the programs are answering the needs of the territory. But I think the point of access has been like the major point, the major takeaway from the importance of these institutions. And I think they could do so much more than just access, but we need to support them to become those more robust institutions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I asked the question also because I thought that if the system is so deeply cherishing human capital approach, then the discussion about the relation between educational institutions and labor market issues, and whether labor market issues should be solved with measures in the education system or within the labor market, are probably clearly shaped by this approach, and then applying capabilities approach is probably not answering the questions that people with this glasses ask. So yeah, that's about the stuff I was thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a process of a dialogue. I think the only thing that could, because we are not saying that we don't need to answer the needs of the industry. We're saying that we have to answer something broader than just the needs of the industry. So we still have to be sure that our programs prepare students to get a good job, and not only get a good job, to be on that position and be able to transition to a better position, or to move to another industry, even another industry. So those are I think those are challenges that are deeply related with discourses like the fourth industrial revolution that are real. and that you need to approach learning, vocational learning, from a different perspective, because currently we are asking employers, what do you need today? And we are preparing students who will be going to those jobs 4 years later, and maybe the entire need changed. So it's not only a matter of talking about what learnings are needed in terms of this broad, a more human-centered approach, but also in terms of the actual way of building the curriculum is not answering the industry needs. So even discourses like the skills gap, that it's always questionable. But even if we agree with the notion of the skills gap, so that's a proof that we need to change the way we approach curriculum programs and different elements of education.
Thank you. And I think there are other questions from Anne Charles.
Yep.
Sorry, I should say at the outset, I find the presentation was just so amazing, really, really interesting. I've got lots of questions, so I apologize if I'm asking too many. No, but as I'm just thinking about the questions, I'm just putting them in the chat, and just if there's anything that you have to say about them. But I was thinking about sort of, the student loans, and you mentioned, I think it was 2006, if my memory is correct, in the presentation. You said that there were student loans, and I was just interested, this expansion of opportunities, so it's an accessibility feature, whether there was any data being collected on the return of investment for student loans. So obviously that's a public output, but it's also a sort of a measurement aspect for policy. So one can see the impact of policy on that. So I wondered whether firstly, whether the loans were income contingent, and so the repayment was income contingent, and if there was also a search for some sort of way to measure sort of the personal development or the well-being aspect from higher vocational education. And that led to my second question, and sorry to ramble here, and that is that we know that there is correlation between sort of democratic participation and higher education. So that's, many countries in the world within a democratic framework, of course. But we know that the more education you have, the much more likely it is that you're going to turn out to vote. Now, whether that be at a local level or further to national government. But I wondered whether that could be sort of considered to be a study metric that could be used, did you vote or did you not in X elections? And whether that could be some part of platform that then would go to provide some sort of data to assist in the measurable aspects of sustainability and well-being, which of course are going to be very difficult to contextualize. So it's just really sort of a flow of ideas, and I'm sorry if that's a bit garbled, but whatever you can make of it, I'd be really interested.
Yeah, there's data on return on investment for student loans and for higher education, because the students' loans were made available to vocational students on 2006, but for university students, they have been available for many decades, with different configurations, but still. And the return of higher education in Chile, it's really big. I mean, there's a huge gap between someone who just have a high school diploma and someone who completed a short cycle program in higher education, and this is progressive, at least until the baccalaureate. I think there's a diminishing return in terms of graduate studies, but it's highly dependent also, and just like I think just like any part of the world on the economic sector that you are where you work, or kind of work like that. I mean, there are some programs that have a huge returns on investment, and there are others that have a very small or even a negative return on investment, and that has been identified also. So it really depends on what did you study, and also in things like if you are a man or a woman or a woman, if you are indigenous or not, or things like that also affect return on investment. And about how, repayment is income contingent. It is. We have a discussion now about that, but I won't enter in that space because also it's not my area. But we don't know how to measure still matters that are different to income or employability or learning. So yeah, I mean, democratic participation is an interesting metric to understand how people relate with another aspects of life beyond work and education.
Thank you,
Cristian. This was an absolutely wonderful discussion, and I really think it broadened the whole discussion, made it more and more open and wider, and was really absolutely inspiring. Thank you so much. Lisa, do you want to end with something as well?
I just want to just to say thank you very, very much, Cristian. It was a wonderful presentation. It was really very thoughtful, rich in information, rich in analysis. I think your discussion about the challenges and opportunities provide a lot of scope for policy learning, and not necessarily policy borrowing, but for policy learning. And I think your presentation is really helpful, not just for students of higher education and vocational education, but also policy studies and politics, you know, because you were able to bring all those threads together in a really fabulous way. Just a little plug, Cristian has a chapter in a book that we co-edited, and I cannot remember the name of the book, even though I'm one of the co-editors.
It's a really long name, so it's a really long title. So yeah, but it's kind of access to high skills through
higher vocational education or something like that. Yeah, and it's an absolutely outstanding chapter. So if people want to follow this up more, please feel free. And I think that Cristian's experience since that chapter was written, it would be lovely to have a follow-up chapter at some point, and we'll have to organize that, but perhaps when you've got a bit more time. That would be lovely. We also are going to have a seminar on Brazil with Claudia Scheidegg, and she's going to be talking about they've gone through, I mean, obviously completely different political context, completely different set of policies and circumstances, but she's going to be talking about the federal institutes in Brazil, which are relatively new institutions, which offer entry-level vocational education right up to the doctoral level in vocational education. And Claudia was the rector of one of those institutes. And so that will be a really wonderful thing to hear. We're also going to have two further presentations, one on Australia with Associate Professor Stephen Hodge, who's going to be talking about, I mean, Australia's just been through 2 decades of enormous policy churn and a drive towards rampant privatisation and marketisation. And now we have, and just when vocational education institutions were on the precipice of complete and utter catastrophe, We had the election of governments, Labor governments, which are trying to save these institutions. And what that shows is it's not an easy thing to do. Once you've brought institutions to the brink, you can't just turn around and do a policy U-turn and say, okay, you know, we were wrong 20 years ago. And that will be a really interesting discussion. Also, it's interesting, the theme of privatisation and marketisation seems to come up in almost all of these presentations as challenges for vocational education institutions. And we also hope to have one from Steph Elias in South Africa on where again, where post the fall of apartheid in 1994, they've had a very turbulent history of educational policy and experiments that haven't been altogether super successful in terms of implementing competency-based models of curriculum and qualifications frameworks. And so she's going to talk about the role of further education and training colleges in that context. So we still got more to come. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you to Cristian. Thank you to the graduate assistants who organised this presentation, to Erin Anderson, Ahmet Su, and Seong Lee. So thank you very, very much to all of you, because without them, this series just wouldn't have happened, and they've done a wonderful job. Gavin's managed to find Cristian's chapter. Very good. So that's in the chat.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Also, Lisa, thank you for having me. And Miski just couldn't come, but yeah. She's also grateful from this invitation. So whenever you want us to.
And we know that she played a big role in this presentation. So thank you to both of you.
Yeah. I mean, it's her part of the policy, higher education. So
yeah, fantastic.
Thank you. So next, in 2 weeks, we have the talk of Stephen Hodge, eroding the social role of vocational education in Australia, and we would love to see you there.
Ahmed, have we got the links up for that one yet or not?
I believe we do on the CIHE website, and I think we'll have them on the Twitter account very soon. Erin organizes that, but I believe we have already.
Excellent, because we need to start pushing that out, so that would be great.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining, Cristian. It was amazing to be in touch and have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So good.